Dr. Price, the heart of Christianity is death, burial, resurrection, but crucifixion is part of that heart. When we see passages about carrying one's cross and following Jesus or being crucified with Christ, it makes me wonder if this is mystery school language, or a man who was recently literally crucified by Romans. What did Paul mean, or what do you think he thought when he thought about Christ crucified? Did he think astrotheology or some type of celestial cross? Did he think something that was understood in mystery schools? Too often, the historicist, not without reason, good reason I suspect, reject the mythicist celestial claims because Jews were commonly crucified in actual history by the Romans during the first century. Did Paul's idea of crucifixion have anything to do with the crucifixion of the Jews, for example, the Roman-Jewish War, or even during the time when the Romans were crucifying rebels against Rome? Does that have anything to do with Paul's mindset of crucified Christ in your head? And if not, can you explain what it is?
Yeah, he doesn't seem to mention political conditions or motives, and that's what gives rise to the problem, because the problem is not, why would a guy get crucified? I mean, it's ridiculous. Of course, thousands of people were. That's not the difficulty. The difficulty is that when Paul mentions the crucifixion, there is no political or historical reference to it. He doesn't say, as he could easily have said, that through the Romans, Satan saw to the crucifixion of Jesus. He doesn't say that. He never says the Romans did it. He's very different than in 1 Peter and in Romans 13, where it says that, well, we know that Caesar is given a sword to keep order, and the Romans don't execute the innocent. That's very strange to say if you think that the Son of God was unjustly crucified by Rome. So you wonder if he had that in mind, or if the author of 1 Peter did either. So who did crucify him? Well, according to 1 Corinthians, it's the archons of this age. And that word can be used of earthly rulers, but none is stated. Whereas what it goes on to say, how the archons, which of course does mean angelic rulers in Gnosticism, that they engineered the crucifixion of Jesus stupidly, because in so doing they engineered their own defeat. Well, how would that apply to Pilate or Caesar or anything? There's no connection made even in the Gospels. It says, well, they shouldn't have done this because now God is gonna come down on them with a sledgehammer. It makes more sense to say that the evil spirits who wanted Jesus dead and out of the way were fools to do what they did, because they brought about the very thing they feared. The thing in Colossians where the accusations against us, apparently the Torah laws, was nailed to the cross as the death warrant, implying that for failure to obey it, Jesus was crucified. But we then learn that in being crucified, Jesus was disarming the principalities and powers, because their weapon was the law they gave. And that's why Christians should not worry about the laws. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. These things they seem to have an appearance of piety, but they don't really. It's just the schemes of the principalities and powers. They gave the law, he says in Galatians. So it seems to me that has nothing conceivably to do with why Romans would crucify a guy.
I guess you probe on that, because this is interesting, and I'm sure you're going to get to more as we go. But they'll say, well, where are you getting this idea that demons are gods? I get that the archons of this age, but someone might try, because the Gospels come into mind when you start thinking about this. Well, the archons of this age. Like the recent debate I had with James Stephen Valiant, I was moderator, and author of Jesus the Hoax, or I can't remember, Jesus Was a Hoax, or I can't remember the name of the title of the book. Either way, he believed the archons were Rome, right? Which would make no sense, because they didn't really get defeated, or unless you completely say, he didn't know what he's talking about, and nothing ever happened. The Gospels portray, if you take the archons to be leaders, but in a bad sense, it's the Jews. These people that are obviously saying, let his blood be on us and our children. Now, I guess my question is, the real people who crucified Jesus at that point weren't necessarily the Romans. It would be the Jews in the Gospels. But is that what Paul means? Well, it's easy to deduce that would be what he means if you try to connect the two.
Yeah, big if.
Big if, yes.
You can't say what Paul means by saying, well, he must have agreed with this other writer. You just can't do that, because there's so much difference in the way the different authors treat Jesus. For Paul, Jesus was not a miracle worker, not even a teacher, and he didn't heal the sick, he didn't cast out demons. He's so different from, and again, he's not the Jewish Messiah, really. So you can't just assume that it means the same thing. So I just think that's like an ad hoc hypothesis. It's not only that they're not mentioned as the enemies of Jesus, but that implicitly they're taken for granted as the friends of Jesus, because they keep order, which is the will of God, who gave them their position to maintain it. So it seems to me that's just fundamentalist harmonizing. Interpret the ones you don't like as if they said the same as the ones you do like.
Well, let's probe there. That's a really good point. And so I guess my question then would be, following up that idea, as everyone who's watching this is following us, it's obvious. Archons of this age is strange. It is strange language. And let's run with your interpretation that these archons of the age, and it's not just your interpretation. Let me emphasize for people. This is countless other scholars that would suggest the archons of this age is spiritual, evil spirits or demons or something like power gods.
In heavenly places, Ephesians says. We war not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and of evil in heavenly places, in the concentric spheres.
Right. And for those watching, Dr. Price is using the ideas of levels of heaven and such, because this is written in countless other literature that was obviously held by people that thought these same used the same terms, thought the similar ways and such. And mystery school ideas, I suspect, play a role. But my question gets down to crucifixion, right? Historicists go, come on, what's the most commonly used tool for insurrection and to teach a lesson to someone or to punish somebody is to crucify them. And I've heard it said that tool, the idea of a crucifix, isn't necessarily what Romans intended or meant. It didn't mean the cross figure type symbol. They would put you on a pole sometimes, through your rectum out of your mouth, depending on where and how they did this, or just hung you on a tree, literally. So an Acts says that, which is really strange about Jesus being hung on a tree. Every man cursed is hung on a tree.
In Galatians too.
Really weird. So my question would be, is this the tree, the All-Father tree of Odin? Is this the crucifixion concept that's some type of celestial symbol? What do you think Paul meant by it if it wasn't the crucifixion of men or a man named Jesus in the 30s under Pontius Pilate dying on a cross and the Romans did it, what do you think Paul meant?
Well, it seems more likely to me it is a mystery religion association, because in the mystery religions, the Savior underwent some kind of ordeal or even death or a battle, like when Mithras slayed the cosmic bull to bring fertility to the earth. When Osiris was dismembered and murdered and was brought back to life by anointing, when Hercules defeated the Nemean lion and donned the lion's mane after skinning it, and in all the rituals commemorating this, the myth was a script for the ritual, because in order, what good would the victory of Mithras, Hercules, Osiris, etc. do you if you just celebrated the fact that they did it? Well, there had to be some way that you could be included in this, or you could patch into it. And that's why they had baptisms in water or blood, supposedly in the Mithraeum. And the Hercules initiate would don a lion's mane, whether real or fake, who knows. And the Attis initiate would castrate himself, as Attis did when he bled to death before Cybele raised him from the dead. And so you had to participate in a dramatization of this to unite you with the victory of the Savior. And just as, I don't know if they happen to use the phrase, the body of Hercules or Mithras or whatever like they do, but that was basically the idea. And these things were all mythic. Set nailed Osiris into a coffin. He was dismembered and stitched back together by his wife. Hercules was an ancient myth. This was one of his labors. Mithras did this in primordial times. And so it would make the most sense to me if the parallel extended from the notion of Jesus died and was raised, and that will happen to you in baptism, so you will be saved by being made one with him in his victory over death. I say it would make more sense if that too was considered a heavenly / mythical event. And so crucifixion was a brutally earthly thing, but there is the available parallel of a death in the heavens. And given the importance of astrology and astronomy, to depict Jesus as crucified at the intersection of the equinox and I can never remember the terms, where the axis crosses the horizon or something.
Yeah.
That would, if he died there, that would make a lot of sense. And the notion of a saving sacrifice is foreshadowed in the Rig Veda when it says that the primal man, what Jews would call the son of man, Purusha, he sacrifices himself so that the parts of his body will become everything. The sacred books, the different castes of India, everything. It was all coming from him. So it was a voluntary self-sacrifice to give life to the world. Even closer, I think, is the Gnostic myth of the primal man, the man of light, who was dismembered by the archons who wanted his divine sparks to vivify the inert creation of the demiurge, and thus it was a redemptive act. It trapped the divine sparks, and they had to eventually be liberated, but it was a life-giving sacrifice. Where? In heaven. And I think that the Jesus story is a historicization of the story of the Gnostics with the sacrifice of the primal man, who is eventually restored to oneness, just as Jesus rises from the dead.
You brought up something interesting here. I kind of want to, for our audience who's trying to track, they're probably going, Dr. Bob, but just say what crucifixion means, and you kind of did there, I think. But when you brought up these other cults, other mystery school cults from Osiris, Hercules, you name it, that they would act in the place of what their god did. Like, for example, Hercules might have pulled the mane of the lion. Well, there's probably some initiatory process where here you have to deal the same way Hercules or the same way Osiris or whatever. Paul says, I think it's Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, crucified with Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, really weird if he meant let's go get on crosses and have people nail us. Now, I know that
in the Philippines they do.
They do. Now, I know that, of course, later on, supposed crucifixion, Candida Moss argues that that's part of the myths, if you will. But
what did she say is part of the myth?
Candida Moss is talking about the mythology of persecution and stuff. She goes into how a lot of it's the church made up mythology about the persecution. But my point is did Paul really mean, let's go get crucified with Christ. Everybody jump on a cross or go antagonize a Roman citizen, but don't break a law if you can, because I said in Romans 13, let's walk a fine line, but let's get crucified together with him. Why would you say that? Like, why would you even say get crucified with Christ? Well, it sounds mystery school kind of thing. So I ask what the crucifixion is. If it's not on a cross, like...
It's in water. It's in the baptism. You're crucified with Christ there, buried and raised. And so you should live that way. You have died to sin. And so it's symbolic, but he does talk about that, the death and the new life, and crucified with Christ to the world. You have no stake in it anymore. It doesn't matter to you what the world says. And I'm crucified to the world, and the world is crucified to me. He says, because of the saving image of the cross. And so it denotes it. I mean, that couldn't really be clearer in Paul. And the crucifixion, like you said, need not necessarily even mean you're nailed to a wooden beam. It might, but it could be impalement. Some people think it could even simply mean, like the crucible in Arthur Miller, that it's just a forge of suffering. But I think it makes sense to say that they're talking about the cross of the stars, since especially, Revelation could not make it any clearer that you've got beings up there in the stars. So I just don't see the problem with that. I mentioned the other day that in 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 10, Paul is talking about being attacked by one of Satan's angels in heaven. If you can say that, I don't know what the problem is with the idea of the archons ganging up on Jesus in heaven.
Right. Now that's pretty strange language. I know I could see a rationalist trying to scratch their head and go, how can I explain this in reasonable terms? Well, what he meant by heaven was a location in Jerusalem, or, something like, there's always an explanation.
But, of course, if you're talking about a vision where he says, I don't know if it happened physically or not, anything goes, all bets are off. A visionary experience could easily be the adequate basis for a sacrament or a spirituality, and it seems like it was. So.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that explanation because it is a good explanation that you present there. Is the historicist one possible? Absolutely. When you look at the Gospels, and the contemporaneous writings of Jews being crucified. Okay, that's common, and the term being used, crucified. So. But Paul saying the world's crucified to him and he's crucified to the world, that gets really weird. Now he doesn't mean it the same way you would think he does. So now it's like, did Paul think crucifixion was the same thing? And it once again makes me agnostic. It makes me at least agnostic. I sway in the evidence. So I really do appreciate that. Is there anything else you could think of in that, or?
Let's see. Well, again, there's this thing in Ephesians about battling the demonic enemies in heavenly places. I mean, you've almost got the thing right there. So it's just not some crazy thing that, oh yeah, Jesus is like an outer space science fiction character. That's not, that's just insulting and trying to ridicule your way out of it.
Right. I think that happened during the debate with you, Dr. Ehrman. But not only that, that happens commonly. Dr. Carrier actually uses that language sometimes in his discussions, and I'm like, why are you saying outer space?
Yeah, I noticed that too. I wish he wouldn't.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not like that's what the... But I know he's saying it for a modern audience to understand what it means. Look up in the heavens, dude. Out there in that black void where those little dots are. Okay, this is where the battle takes place. There's, so I get it. It's just... People are going to go, ew, whack jobs, they're not understanding where you're coming from. And I wish people at least gave you a hear before they go, okay, I still don't accept it, here's why, and go from there. But I don't think many people have given the chance to really listen and hear this side of things, what you're presenting.
Yeah, it doesn't frustrate me because what do I care? I'm just explaining the way it looks to me. I have no dog in the fight. I'm not trying to propagate mythicism. I don't care if anybody else thinks it's a viable theory. Right. It's I don't want to become a nut crusading for something.
Well, one more question. In the book of Acts, it goes back to the Babel speaking in tongues concepts right at the beginning with the gift of tongues coming out. It also seems to me, and then right there at the beginning of Acts, it talks about him hanging on a tree. What I find interesting about that is there's a tree in the garden of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree in Genesis idea. I wonder, because that's where the curse starts to be given, is up there in this place called Eden, where they end up falling. Do you think this is one of those strange... you need to be more read than the 27 New Testament books to kind of get some of this information, but that him hanging on a tree here isn't the notion of a literal guy down the street that just got hung up for insurrection against Rome, but rather this has implications, you're fine, don't worry, implications to Genesis garden language with the tree, going right back to where the root of the source of the problem occurs.
There were ancient and medieval Jewish and then Christian legends that said that it was the tree of life that was chopped down and cut into the staff that Moses used and that Solomon used, and that eventually it was part of the cross of Jesus. And so it's trying to say it becomes the source of eternal life. So that they didn't miss that. And of course it's kind of ridiculous in a way, but it's really symbolic, like you just said. They probably did believe it, but it was because of the symbolic value they saw in it.
So you don't think there's any like Jesus hanging on a tree, or according to the Acts narrative, hanging on a tree, he hung on a tree, or cursed is any man who hangs on a tree, the idea that he was hung on a tree, which is weird than saying he was crucified on stakes or something like that. That tree, do you think that goes back to the garden?
I doubt it, though. They were, I think some people were actually crucified on literal trees.
Right.
But there's a kind of a roundabout link in the Gospel of John, which says that Jesus is like the serpent on the pole, he's lifted up, and all who turn to look at him will be saved. And from the avenging angels, the seraphs, the fiery serpents, and that certainly is a reference to the caduceus Apollo and Asclepius and others, Hermes, held. And so you've already, and it was originally a pole that Nehushtan, the serpent, was entwined in. He was worshipped in the temple, and that seems to go back to Eden, with the we see in artist conceptions of the serpent wound around the branches, and so I mean that's not far removed from the associations of at least in the Gospel of John with
Right.
dying on a tree. So they, who knows what connections they may have made. That's almost irresistible to
You're trying to
connect
stick
those
to the most
dots.
concrete stuff. That's what I like about you. So we could say that hanging on a tree here has something to do with it, like you said. You're not going to say that you're for certain because you don't have good reason to. And someone might go, well, I don't feel there's good reason why Bob thinks he was crucified in the heavens. But I think I'm getting where you're coming from, why you think that's a legit and good reasoning. Your reasoning's not far. I think with my little parallel mania brain loves to look for something that looks similar and try to see if there's something there. Hanging on a tree makes me think, well, maybe he's freaking taking back that tree situation that happened at the beginning, and I just don't know.
You'd almost expect somebody in that period would make that link, because they do come pretty close, especially in John. Though you're right, when I entertain such things, I ask, now, am I discerning the scribal technique being employed here of connecting the dots with different verses, finding a theme that probably wasn't really intended, or am I doing that?
Right.
And I don't know if you can even tell.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Bob. I appreciate it, man.
Oh, it's great fun.